Disney movies are getting a lot of heat right now from all corners. The company's had a bunch of box office flops recently, and the internet has a lot of theories as to why. There's superhero fatigue, Star Wars fatigue, poor CGI,
What is that?
bad writing, and honestly all of these are factors, some bigger than others. But one hypothesis has caught a lot of traction recently, including with me. So Disney spends a lot on its movies. Every high-profile release last year had a massive price tag. Antman Quantumania had a $275 million budget. Elemental and Wish cost $200 million each. The Marvels cost $275 million. And Indiana Jones 5 cost an eye-watering $300 million.
Why?
And these are production budgets only, before adding in marketing costs. So the thinking is, Disney's wasteful spending has created a situation where their movies are too big to fail, but fail anyway. Basically, their budgets are so high, they need box office numbers to be astronomical to even turn a profit. Let's take a look at the two animated movies from last year, Pixar's Elemental and Disney Animation's Wish. Both cost $200 million to make, and both were disappointments. Well, Elemental started slow, but eventually broke even over the summer, and Wish was dead on arrival. Even though these two movies underperformed, their actual numbers weren't that bad in and of themselves. Elemental grossed about $500 million thanks to its historic comeback. That makes it the 10th highest grossing film of 2023. It's an objectively great number that any movie would love to have. But the high budget and marketing costs mean that Elemental was, at worst, a disappointment, and at best, a slight hit. Wish is a similar story. It grossed $246 million, which is solid enough on its own, but barely covers the $200 million production budget. And when you factor in marketing and distribution costs, Wish lost tens of millions of dollars. To put this in perspective, take the second Paw Patrol movie, which came out a month and a half before Wish. It only grossed $202 million, but it was a big success since it only cost $30 million to produce. Now, this isn't a one-to-one comparison. Paw Patrol was targeted at younger kids, whereas Wish was more for families, and had the Disney branding. And yes, saying that, I know that makes Wish's performance look even worse. But the point is, it's a lot easier to avoid a flop if you don't need to crush the box office with each release. And that's just animation. Disney budgets for live-action movies have gotten egregious. I already mentioned the Marvel movies costing over $200 million each, and also Indiana Jones costing $300 million. Budgets this high put major pressure on each movie to be a major success. Look at the live-action Little Mermaid. It made $570 million, which means it was the 8th highest grossing movie of 2023. But it's still considered a disappointment because of how expensive it was to make. Now, I'm not defending the performance of these movies. Even if their final grosses were impressive in a vacuum, they had expectations and failed to meet them. I'm simply saying those expectations were, perhaps, a bit too lofty to begin with. But why is that? Why are Disney's budgets so high in the first place? Do they love to waste money? Could they not simply spend less on each movie? Are they stupid? There's no one definitive answer. That being said, why care at all? So what if Disney movies have big budgets? So what if they fail? We don't work there, at least I don't think most of us do. It doesn't seem like such a big deal. But if you're into movies at all, whether Disney or not, I think it's important to pay attention to Hollywood budgets. For one, Disney's box office flops aren't self-contained. Their failures shut down other movies as well. For example, I doubt we'll see another Captain Marvel movie ever. And even if you hate Captain Marvel, or the whole Marvel itself, there's a big chance something you like has or eventually will be affected by these underperformances. For two, if these massive budgets continue to be a normal thing, it severely restrains what movies get greenlighted in the first place. If everything costs $200 million, then original ideas are that much tougher to adapt. And if you're simply a Disney hater who wants to see their downfall, well, at least you'll learn how the movies are set up to fail in the first place. In 1941, the Disney studio was suffering from the effects of both a contentious months-long strike and a new world war starting in Europe. Pinocchio and Fantasia, both released in 1940, lost a lot of money because of the lack of foreign markets. The studio needed a hit, and they finally got one late in the year when they released Dumbo, a simple hour-long side project made for just $950,000. Now, Dumbo was an unexpected big success, grossing $1.3 million and earning a profit of $850,000 for the studio, basically $20 million in today's dollars. It would have made even more if much of the world wasn't at war. So why am I talking about an 80-year-old movie right now? Well, Dumbo is proof that Disney didn't always need extravagant production numbers to make successful movies. Modern Disney and Pixar movies are super expensive. We know that. But you have something like Across the Spider-Verse, which did better than both of last year's animated Disney release on way less budget. And even though visuals are subjective, pretty much everyone prefers Spider-Verse's art style over Wish or Elemental, which costs a lot more to make. There are lots of contributing factors to these budgets. Before making this video, I assumed the main reason was simply that Disney and Pixar use a ton of advanced CGI and all that super advanced software and stuff. And it's true that they spend a lot on their graphics. Elemental alone used 151,000 CPU cores, for example. Wish used a new animation style that combined watercolor paintings and CGI, which couldn't have been cheap to produce. But high technology can't be the only explanation. The Spider-Verse movies are known for their innovative art style, but they didn't cost $200 million. Instead, two of the major reasons for Disney's high budgets are their insistence on in-house production and their unionized animation team. Let's talk about the in-house production first. Unlike many other mainstream animations, Disney and Pixar animate mostly in-house in the United States. Other studios like Warner Brothers Animation, Paramount Animation, and Illumination all animate either in Canada or overseas in Japan or Europe. For example, last year's Ninja Turtles was animated in Vancouver, in Canada, Paw Patrol in Montreal. The Mario movie was made in Paris. All these movies cost a lot less than Wish and Elemental, and they ended up grossing a lot more, but that's beside the point. It goes without saying that producing your work locally, in-house, is more expensive than outsourcing. And the main reason it's expensive to do so is because of unions. Disney's animators are unionized under the Animators Guild, meaning they're paid really well, they get overtime, they get benefits like healthcare and pensions, and general job protections. And this is great, I'm not complaining or anything. There was actually a whole story last year about how much the Spider-Verse animators were overworked. And that's definitely something Sony could get away with, specifically because it used non-union workers. But at the end of the day, union workers are more expensive. And when you have hundreds of people working years on a project, that adds up to millions of dollars. That being said, I have to mention that DreamWorks Animation also produces their movies in-house in the United States. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish was made for $110 million, and last year's Trolls movie had a budget of about $80 million. Also, a real quick side note, this seems like a good time to bring up that DreamWorks is actually planning to stop in-house production as well, because they're planning to move their production to Canada starting in 2025. An interesting note given what I just said about the other animation studios. Anyway, even though the labor costs are high because of unions and local production, they aren't the only reason Disney budgets are as inflated as they are. The actual reason could be something way out of left field. According to a recent interview with Pixar president Jim Morris, the high budget for his studio's movies is a matter of reporting. He basically says Pixar budgets include executive salaries in the final number, unlike rival studios which only report the physical production costs. We know how generously paid executives can be, so it's easy to see how counting them would add tens of millions of dollars to the final budget number. Looking at Disney's live-action output, those have their own host of costly expenses. For about the last 10 years, Disney's been releasing huge event movies. Along with the Disney and Pixar animations, these events include the live-action remakes, the Star Wars movies, and of course, the MCU. Even though Disney's not the only studio with $150 or $250 million movies, it does release them the most often. After all, it has so many brands and IP, it wants to profit off each of them as often as possible. So it treats each release as a must-see occasion. This kind of thinking worked really well back before COVID. In 2019 alone, Disney had $7 billion movies. Yes, 7. And each brand contributed. You had Disney Animation's Frozen, Pixar's Toy Story 4, Lucasfilm's Rise of Skywalker, Walt Disney Studios' Aladdin and Lion King remakes, and finally, Captain Marvel and Avengers Endgame. All these movies were super expensive to produce and market, but they were all super successful too. They were events, spectacles you didn't want to miss. I'm not gonna lie, for a while it looked like Disney could release anything and make $1 billion. No one looked twice at budget numbers back then. So if you were Disney, it's reasonable to expect similar results if you repeated the process. And that's what they planned until COVID turned the business upside down for a couple of years. Movie theaters closed, and Disney had to either release their movies on Disney Plus or keep them in storage until lockdowns were over. But even after COVID stopped being a major problem, its effect on the movie business never went away. Audience tastes changed over the years, but Disney's release philosophy didn't. See, Disney may be a billion-dollar company, but like all older companies, it's prone to outdated thinking and slow responses to market changes. For decades, conventional movie studio thinking was always that the more money you put into a movie, the more you're supposed to get out of it. There were always flops that broke this rule over the years, but for the most part, a high-budget movie could expect to at least make back its production costs. This meant Disney didn't realize that after COVID, bigger no longer necessarily meant better. They continued producing these high-budget animations, but they also kept producing expensive live-action films. Only this time, budgets were driven even higher thanks to COVID protocols, which really did a number on production costs. These protocols included things like constant testing, protective equipment, schedule shakeups from positive tests, and so on. COVID filming added to budgets of movies like Doctor Strange 2, The Little Mermaid, and other pandemic-era productions. Even Indiana Jones and A Dial of Destiny, which came out just last year, owes some of its $300 million budget to COVID protocols. I really do think COVID is underrated when discussing these movie budgets. An article in Hollywood Reporter from June 2022 stated COVID could add anywhere from 5 to 20% to a film's expenses. So many films coming out recently were filmed in 2021 and 22, when COVID protocols were most active. It's not even just a Disney thing. Look at Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, which cost $300 million itself when it released last year. Or at Fast 10's $340 million budget, which needs a whole video in itself. But COVID was a big reason it got so expensive. And of course, we can't forget inflation. As we all know, the cost of pretty much everything has gone up since 2021, when inflation began increasing rapidly. It only started to slow down last year, but it's still higher than usual. In Hollywood, this affected everything from set construction to catering. According to that same Hollywood Reporter story, raw materials used to build sets, like wood and fabrics, increased by 30% since the start of that year. Plywood even doubled in price in that same time span. And this story was almost 2 years ago. Now, COVID and inflation are certainly big reasons Disney's budgets are so extravagant, but these factors affect the whole film industry. I just mentioned Mission Impossible and Fast 10, two non-Disney releases. So why is Disney getting the most attention for its spending? Well, Disney does release more big movies than other studios, and they do have the most recognizable IP, so naturally they get more press. But there's another reason which affects both live action and animation, and I think it's the most impactful problem. Disney has a direction issue. There's so much corporate ambiguity going on with Marvel, Disney Animation, Star Wars, and so on, that they don't have a clear vision, and it's hurting their bottom line. So what do I mean by unclear vision and corporate interference? Well, as an example, we've all heard and seen how mediocre the CGI has been in recent Marvel movies. Thor: Love and Thunder was memed into oblivion, and I personally hated Antman Quantumania because of how gaudy the movie looked. The Marvels wasn't as bad, but still looked pretty mediocre. This substandard CGI is a symptom of corporate interference. Disney has this mentality of fixing each movie in post-production, where reshoots and special effects can be used to address market needs or fill gaps that the studio thinks are missing. As you can expect, these add millions of dollars to the budget line. Yes, to make sure that their $200 million money sinks succeed, Disney produces its biggest movies almost by committee. This is why so many of their projects seem so similar to each other. There's less emphasis on unique director vision, you could say, which is bad enough from an artistic standpoint. It basically means that Disney's big movies have little identity of their own. But this lack of clear vision also means the studio compensates with reshoots and edits in post-production. The end results of this indirection are the high budgets, which in turn means that Disney needs each movie to be a blockbuster success. And that pressure to succeed means Disney's executives feel compelled to interfere to make sure it works. Now, as you can expect, this is a tough cycle to break. Ironically, this expensive need to avoid risks is inherently leading to high numbers that make those risks even more dangerous. On the other hand, smaller budgets would mean more movies, which would mean more chances to connect with an audience. Cord Jefferson said it best in his recent Oscar acceptance speech. But let's go back to talking about blockbusters. Even those can be budgeted better than Disney has done. Compare one of those MCU movies to something like Dune Part 2, which cost a little less to make than the Marvels and Antman, but looks so much better. And Dune is actually a bigger movie. Up until a few years ago, that series was thought to be unfilmable because of how epic the world scale is. But Warner Brothers managed to produce Part 2 for just $190 million after producing Part 1, which was no less complicated, for $165 million. And these numbers include COVID and inflation overruns. Why is that? Well, I'm sure a film production channel could tell you the specifics of the effects and on-location filming and all that cool tech stuff, but I want to take a moment to talk about the director, Denis Villeneuve. Being a master at his craft, Villeneuve had a clear vision of what he wanted Dune to be, and he executed it without too much interference from the suits at Warner Brothers. This meant less reshoots, and less post-production backtracking, and less corporate cold feet, I should add. The result is a movie that knows what it wants to be, and quite a successful one for it. The movie looks great and is easy to follow, which is more than can be said for some of Disney's recent work on Marvel, for example. Also, real quick, Godzilla Minus One is being widely praised for its amazing special effects, even winning an Academy Award this year, but it only cost $15 million to make in total. Now it's a Japanese production, so not that relevant to what I'm saying here, but I feel like it's worth a mention. The fact that it costs so little to make is a sign that movies don't need monster budgets. Now, I'm not saying Marvel movies need to be $15 million, but making them for a little less is clearly possible without compromising on quality. Anyway, this is what I believe Disney needs to get back to. Their mediocre CGI and ballooning budgets are symptoms of a lack of confidence and vision in their work. They're developing movies by committee, and with so many chefs in the kitchen, those reshoots and CGI post-production edits are needed to bend and twist a movie into something that checks all the corporate boxes. Their movies need to feel more like unique works of art and less like factory productions. And finally, going back to my original point, doing all that would naturally lead to smaller budgets. So between market conditions like inflation and COVID, and executive decisions on marketing and CGI, or even something as random as the inclusion of executive salaries in the budget line, what's really to blame for all this? Like I said at the beginning, it's a lot of everything. Well, that's all I have to say about that. At the end of the day, we all want to see better movies, whether they cost $200 million or $2 million. But as we've seen, the more expensive those budgets are, the less likely we are to see those good movies. You can only take so many $200 million risks, after all. Disney said recently that they're aware of the problem and are working to fix both their quality and quantity of releases. Let's hope they and the rest of Hollywood figure it out soon. If you like this, please subscribe for more, and comment below on what you think is the issue with Disney's movie budgets. See you later.